Alright, the spoilers for the new chapter pack Daggers in the Dark released today, so time for me to talk about these cards a bit. Let's see if I can keep it shorter than my first one for In Daznak's Pit. Let's get right into it. We have the Arbor Marketplace. This is the non-limited Tyrell economy card for the cycle. Challenges action, kneel Arbor Marketplace to give a character +1 in a challenge. Seems pretty good. I mean, I think this actually compares favorably to Renly's Pavilion. The +1 is often good enough. I mean, it's one less strength in your favor that still triggers Randall Tarley and Highguard and Courtiers, and it has a gold on it instead. I think I'm definitely going to give this a try, and I imagine that it'll see a fair bit of play. You could also play it in addition to Renly's Pavilion, obviously, and just make it even more of a headache to try to do challenge math for your opponent. We have probably the most anticipated card of the pack, possibly competing with, where is she, this Cersei down here that we'll get to. The Assault from the Shadows agenda. This is the Shadows focused agenda. Reduce your gold on your revealed plot by 1. That's pretty bad. This agenda needs to be doing something pretty powerful to make up for that. But its sort of upside that it has, as a marshalling action, you kneel your faction card to put a card from your hand in Shadows for free, no gold cost, but you do have to marshal your kneel your faction card with a Shadow token on it, and if it does not have the printed Shadow keyword, it gains Shadow X, where X is its cost. I think there are 3 factions that will at least try to use this agenda when it releases. Whether or not they will be good with it, I'm not sure, but I think you could reasonably try to make a deck with this agenda that is more than just a meme deck and might actually be kind of good. They are the 3 factions that seem to have gotten the most support for the Shadows keyword and mechanic over the course of this cycle, as indicated by the fact that they are also the 3 factions which have gotten locations based around Shadow mechanics. It's Lannister, Martell, and Tyrell. Lannister got the Bowels of Casterly Rock, Martell got the Shadow City, and Tyrell got the Old Town Undercity. Lannister and Tyrell also got some sort of big linchpin characters that you might try to build a Shadows themed deck around, because they have pretty powerful effects that interact with Shadows. One of those is a little bit farther down in this pack, the new version of Cersei Lannister, and Tyrell has the new Queen of Thorns, who has the ability to bring cards out of Shadows for free when she wins a challenge. And obviously, if you combine that Queen of Thorns with this agenda, you can put Renly into Shadows during your marshalling phase, and then use her ability to bring him into play for free. So getting a 7-cost character into play for 0 gold just by kneeling your faction card and winning a challenge, which is probably pretty easy because that Queen of Thorns has stealth, that's pretty powerful and might be strong enough to actually, sort of justify running this agenda as Tyrell. With Martell, I don't know that they have any single big scary character like that, but they just have a lot of dirty stuff that they can do with this agenda and the Shadow City. Martell, I think, is the faction with the most amounts of good ambush characters that you actually want to use for their ambush effects, who can be effectively discounted by this agenda. You can put Ario Hotah, Shadow City Bastard, I guess for a First Snow of Winter turn, Dornish Spy, Southron Messenger, all those type of cards, you can put them into Shadows with this agenda, and then Ario Hotah can be brought out of Shadows for only 3 gold instead of paying the 5 as you normally would to ambush him. That's a pretty good thing to do. You can also use the obvious combo of putting a card into Shadows, then discarding it out of Shadows and into your Flea Bottom pile with the Shadow City. And this allows you to not only get Ario Hotah or whatever character into your discard pile without having to play March to the Wall or try to discard them for reserve or anything funny like that. It gets them right in there without you having to marshal them normally at all, and you draw 2 cards. So that seems like it could be pretty powerful. One trick that I personally am going to be trying with this agenda and Martell is the card, what is that card called? Locked Away. Locked Away is a 3-cost attachment. It's terminal, and the effect is, after the marshalling phase begins, return attached character to its owner's hand, cannot be saved. So normally this attachment was bad because you would marshal it and then the opponent would flip confiscation and you wasted 3 gold. But with this agenda, you put it into Shadows instead, and then you can bring it out before the opponent actually has a chance to discard it. Although now that I think about it, the timing on that is actually, I guess what you would do is you would flip trade routes, and then you would have gold in the plot and draw phases to bring it out of shadows, and then you can bounce scary stuff like Euron guaranteed. Dupes can't save them or anything. That actually might be worth it. So I think I'm going to give that a try in a Martell Assault from the Shadows with 2 trade routes type of deck. I guess I should also run Someone Always Tells in that deck, but enough about that. That's the agenda. People are definitely going to experiment with it. I'm not sure if it's actually going to be good. I've already tried to make some decks with it, and again, I'm on the fence, but I suppose when I start playtesting, we'll see if they're good or not. We've got this Baratheon event, Banished from the Light, a Shadow 2 event. After you win a power challenge, choose a character, place it into shadows with a shadow token on it. While it's in shadows, it gains shadow X. X is the cost. Obviously, the use of this is to hit an opponent's really big, powerful character and send them back, or not send them back, send them into shadows, from which it will be very difficult for the opponent to bring them out again, because you cannot reduce a shadows action with any of your normal reducer locations. You can't reduce it with Great Halls or the zero cost reducers or anything like that. You just have to actually pay 6 or 7 gold straight up, which is a lot more awkward to do and probably requires you to like play trade routes. Pretty powerful if you actually get it to go off, but I think it's too expensive and too conditional, and there is the threat that the opponent could just flip trade routes and get the character back. So I'm not sure about this card. If you want to make a janky Baratheon Assault from the Shadows deck, maybe you use this because the agenda can put it into shadows, and that way you only have to pay 2 for it instead of 4. Maybe that makes it more playable. But outside of that, I mean, unless you're trying Baratheon Assault from the Shadows, I really think 4 is just too expensive. And you have to actually win a power challenge, and they have to have a character that you care about banishing. I don't know. Maybe because Greyjoy is so popular, it'll still somehow be worth it. We'll see. On a Misty Morn, choose up to 2 non-unique characters in your dead pile and return them to your hand. I can think of one good use for this card already, which is in Greyjoy, because you can revive your, what are those guys called? The Drown God Fanatics back into your hand, which would be quite strong, I would say. I would definitely pay 1 gold to get 2 0 gold treacheries back, and probably pretty frustrating for the opponent if you do that. But outside of that fairly specific use, I'm not sure what the utility of this is. Maybe it's also good in Drowned God decks, so you can recur your Drowned God, what are those guys called? The little 2-cost Acolyte of the Waves or other Drowned God characters without having to rely on Tarly the Thrice Drowned. That's another way you might be able to use it. Maybe Martell could recur Bastard Daughters. I don't know. Outside of the 2 Greyjoy uses that I named, I'm not sure what other deck you would really want to use this in. So it's sort of a weird, not sure what it's going to do card for now. We have Brazen Beast. This is a Targaryen guard character with Shadow 3 and cost of 4. And the ability that as a marshalling action, you can pay 3 gold to put him into shadows from your discard pile. I don't think this card is good because he's also Shadow 3, so you have to pay 3 to put him into shadows with his ability, and then pay 3 to actually bring him out. And at that point, you're paying 6, and you're paying it in raw gold. You're not able to reduce it with any, reducer chumps, just to get a 4-strength Bicon. And that just seems bad. I mean, why would you pay 6 for that as Targaryen when you have a 5-strength Bicon that costs 0, whose name is Kotho? So I don't see this getting any play. The Blood of the Viper is a Martell attachment. It can only go on Sand Snakes. It has Ambush 2, and reaction after you lose a challenge in which attached characters participating, stand it. I don't think that this will be very good. We had a stand when you lose effect already printed, which was Shandystone, and it's more versatile than this. Shandystone could target any character instead of having to be attached to a specific character and only being able to go on Sand Snakes. But I suppose that I think Shandystone also required you to lose as the defending player, And with this attachment, you can lose as an attacker and the character will stand. But it still just doesn't seem good enough to be worth it. Maybe you could put it on, but Alaria Sand isn't a Sand Snake, so no, I just don't think there's any real good use for this card. It seems bad. We've got Daggers in the Dark, another 4-cost shadow event. This is a Night's Watch event. Reaction after you win a challenge as the defending player, choose and kill an attacking character. The attacking player may sacrifice 2 characters to cancel this effect. Oh, excuse me. But I think this is another bad event. It costs 4 and it's too conditional and weird to set up. Even if someone is not trying to play around this card, it's fairly common that they will just not declare an attack, which they are not able to win. So since this requires you to win as the defender, you would also need to have some type of effect that sort of surprises the opponent and allows you to win the challenge as a defender when they did not expect that you would be able to win. I think it is too expensive and has too many requirements to actually do something, and is bad and probably will not see any play. Now we have the other sort of big scary card that people are probably excited about from the pack, the new version of Cersei Lannister, who I will probably be calling the Shadow Cersei, because not only does she have the Shadow keyword, she also has a Shadow focused ability, and it seems quite powerful. After a card you control comes out of Shadows during the challenges phase, each opponent discards 1 card at random from their hand, limit 3 times per phase. So you can discard 3 things from the opponent's hand in a very non-interactive manner. You don't have to win any challenges, you don't even have to declare any challenges. Cersei doesn't have to be in any challenges. You can just start bringing stuff out of Shadows and discard their whole hand, theoretically. This seems pretty scary. I think you could do a lot of hand damage with this. I don't know how good it is in the current state of the game, but if you just use this and discard their hand and then do a reset, there's definitely potential there. And obviously people are going to be building Assault from the Shadows decks around this card, including myself. We'll see how good she is. Alright, I'm going to take a short break. Be right back. Alright, had to go do something very quickly. Now we have Gifts for the Widow. This is a Targaryen event. Search your deck for an attachment with cost X or lower and put it into play attached to a character you control. I don't think you ever play this in quote-unquote normal Targaryen decks. They don't really run hardly any attachments. The only one that you really might see is Beggar King, and I don't see anyone putting this in just to go get Beggar King. You cannot really get Crown of Gold because the attachment has to go on a character you control, not the opponent. However, this is a Cohor event. I think this event is obviously good in Cohor and does not really need much explanation as to why, and will probably be in most, if not all, Cohor decks with either Targaryen or more commonly Banner of the Dragon, since it's non-loyal. You can use it to go get Queen's Guard. That just seems really strong, yeah. Not much else to say. We have Makoro, who is weird because I believe he is the first R'hllor character to not be like a neutral Brotherhood or a Baratheon character, but he is R'hllor. He is Shadow 5, so very expensive. He costs the same as Sir Robert Strong. And he also has a very powerful ability. After he comes out of Shadows during a challenge, choose a defending character and place it on top of its owner's deck. I don't think this is very good because it's too easy to play around. People already just don't declare defenders on a lot of, fairly often in challenges that they can't win. So there's a high chance that you can't really find a good place to use him. It's even harder to pull off than Robert Strong, I would say, because Robert Strong can just come out and kill one of their important dudes, even if it was knelt to attack. This can only work if they kneel it to defend. Although there is no cost limit on this, so it could send a 7 cost characters to the top of the deck, which would be devastating if it happens, but if you're Greyjoy and you have a card in Shadows and you just don't marshal anything and save 5, that's really suspicious, and a savvy opponent will know that you could have this card in Shadows, and they can just play around it fairly easily. And that's very bad for you, because then you wasted 5 gold that you probably would have rather spent marshaling something. Greyjoy is not a faction that really wants to save a ton of gold for the challenges phase. They usually like to spend all their gold on marshaling their big dudes or spamming out a bunch of locations if it's a warship deck. If you spend 5 trying to go in on this guy and the opponent just plays around it and doesn't let you do it, and the 5 goes away in taxation phase without having done anything, that's really super duper inefficient. So I don't think he's very good. Alright, next we have the Night Fort Builder. After Night Fort is knelt, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a Night's Watch location or attachment, draw it. He's cheap, he only costs 2, another sort of generally good builder draw type of guy. Maybe he can replace like Builder at the Wall or Sworn Brother. And maybe you even just put him in normal Night's Watch decks because he's a cheap dude with the potential to draw cards. Maybe he's worth it there. I think he will see some play, and definitely will see play in Builders, if nothing else. We have the Ravages of War. This is a plot with fairly good stats, 4/6/1. When revealed, each player sacrifices a character or location, chooses and discards a card from hand, and discards a card from Shadows. I think the Shadows discard is the important part of this plot. Even though it has fairly good stats, I don't think that a North Remembers type of effect is really good enough to justify including it. You really need to be using it to discard like the opponent's Aegon Targaryen or Mira Reed out of their Shadows area. That's where this plot could be useful, and maybe it finds its way into some Wars decks as counterattack for those cards. Since Targaryen is so popular, it's possible that you could snipe an Aegon with this. I don't know if that's actually worth it. You're honestly probably better off just having a second copy of Forced March instead of this plot, but it is here, I guess, if Shadows ever becomes enough of a problem. This is something that you could use to counterattack against it. We have Red Ronnet. While Red Ronnet is attacking, if the defending player controls a card in Shadows, raise your claim by 1. And he's like 4/4 Bicon. So fairly decent stats, but I think the ability is too inconsistent to be worth it. I can't really get excited about a 4-cost blank character with no abilities if the opponent does not have a card in Shadows, and they can play around it by seeing that you have marshaled this card and then just bringing out whatever it is that they have in Shadows, like the opponent. Maybe it's Stark with Mira Reed, and they're just like, oh well, I guess I'll bring Mira Reed out of Shadows now, and now this guy has blank text. Other than no attachments, I guess, if you count that. So it doesn't seem super good. I don't plan on using him, and I think he will only be good if somehow like Assault from the Shadows becomes the new top agenda that you have to look out for. Then maybe he's good because he could actually consistently have an ability. But other than that, I don't think he's worth it. And the same thing goes for Sir Jason Mallister here, who actually has the same stat line of 4/4, 2 icons. After you win a challenge in which Jason Mallister is attacking, choose a card in Shadows controlled by the losing opponent and discard it. So basically another card that punishes Shadows cards on the other player's side. And just as I explained for Red Ronnet, I don't really think he's good. He is slightly better because he can get Renown, so maybe he sees some play in Crossing as a one-of because he is a cheap-ish character that can gain Renown. You know, he can go in there alongside Daisy Mormont, but mostly I don't think he's anything to get excited about. We have Rhymes with Meek, which is a Greyjoy draw event. After you win an unopposed challenge, draw 2 cards, or 3 if you played it from Shadows. So you can pay 1 to draw 2 cards, or pay 2 to draw 3. I'm not sure if this is really worth it. I think if you're trying to draw cards off of unopposed challenges, I'd rather just go with Great Kraken. Excuse me. Or the Reader, which is a draw from unopposed ability strapped onto a body instead of taking up an event slot. I think this card is fairly inefficient, but I mean, maybe it's decent enough to shore up your draw in an unopposed deck. I guess we could try it out and see. And maybe in a Greyjoy Assault from the Shadows, if for some reason you're ever trying to play that, you could use this card because your agenda can then put it into Shadows for 0. And it now allows you to draw 3 for 0 if you win it unopposed. And now, at that point, it's actually kind of good. Maybe that is the deck that it belongs in. Greyjoy Assault from the Shadows and nowhere else. We have the Shrewd Diplomat, Tyrell character, who has Shadow 3 and Ambush 5. So you could pay 5 by marshalling her into Shadows and bringing her out for 3, or just ambushing her for 5. After she enters play during a challenge, choose a participating character, stand and remove from the challenge. Given the bad stats on the card, a 3 strength power monocon, I don't expect it to ever be used except in Tyrell Assault from the Shadows. And this is good in Tyrell Assault from the Shadows because the combo that you can do with the Shadows version of the Queen of Thorns is that the Queen of Thorns wins a challenge, brings this card out of Shadows, and then the Shrewd Diplomat stands and removes the Queen of Thorns from the challenge in the same action window, and then you can attack with the Queen of Thorns again. And even then, I'm not sure if it's really that good, but you did get a free character out of it with the Shrewd Diplomat, and then if the Queen of Thorns does a second challenge and brings out a second character, I guess that's pretty efficient. But it's also pretty specific. Like if you don't have the Queen of Thorns, or you don't have two things worth bringing out from Shadows or whatever, this card is not that great, so maybe it is too awkward to use even then. You could use it on opponents' characters. If it just removed them from the challenge flat out, that'd be really strong, but since they stand and can then participate in another challenge later, I think it's not really worth it. I don't know that it's worth it to pay 5 to remove Euron Crow's Eye from an intrigue challenge so that he can just then participate in a military or power instead. I don't know that that is ever going to be a very efficient thing to do. We have the Starfall Spy. This is a good Shadows support character for Martell. She has Shadow 3, so she's a very expensive Shadows character. You're paying 5 for a 2-strength character if you put her into Shadows normally. But I think she's pretty much only for an Assault from the Shadows deck, and her ability is that after you win a challenge in which she's participating, you return her to Shadows to choose another card you control in Shadows and put it into play. And that's actually pretty efficient because, first of all, there's potential to just put in like 7-cost Duran with this ability, but I think it's also, there's like a lot of potential to just bring out, Ariane or Ario Hota or, well, not Ario Hota actually, the timing wouldn't really work with him, but whatever useful character that you've put into Shadows that costs more than 3 gold, if you can cheat them into play for free with this ability, it's pretty darn efficient. Getting Nymeria onto the board for free is pretty nice, and she can always come back out of Shadows later, or more likely, another thing that makes this card promising is once she's put herself into Shadows, you can discard her out of Shadows with the Shadow City and bring her back into play and use her ability again with Flea Bottom. That's pretty damn good if you can do that, I would say. So yep, Martell Assault card, I think. We've got Varys, a new version of Varys. This is a big motivating factor to play Assault from the Shadows, I think, is this card. He has a Shadow 8, so he's just too expensive for a normal deck, but he also has the effect, reduce the cost to bring him out of Shadows by 1 for each other card in Shadows. So if you have a ton of cards in Shadows, you can reduce him enough to actually make him affordable, and when he comes out of Shadows, you choose and kill a character with power. And I don't think I need to explain why that's good. That could definitely win you a game if you kill, Randall Tarley. So I expect this to be in every Shadows deck and to be a significant threat that people have to watch out for when they're playing against Assault from the Shadows. Unfortunately, I don't know if he'll be that much of a deciding type of factor because Greyjoy has saves, so he won't be able to do much to them, but in general, he does have the potential for some pretty big plays. We have the Bastard's Letter. This is an expensive Stark Shadow event. It's even more expensive than the other 2 expensive Shadow events that we've seen. It is a 5-cost event. It is a Shadow event that costs 3 to bring it out of Shadows. After opponent initiates military against you, stand any characters you control with a military icon, and if you win the challenge, kill each attacking character. This is bad for the same reason as Daggers in the Dark. It's probably even worse than Daggers in the Dark because it's even more awkward to actually set it up and pull off. It's more expensive. The opponent has to initiate a military. You have to be able to win the military on defense. You have to have 5 gold to actually pay for the event, and the opponent has to be attacking with a character or multiple that you actually care about killing, which is just too many boxes to tick. It's too awkward, it's too expensive. Even in Assault from the Shadows, I don't think this is Stark Assault from the Shadows. I don't think this card's ever going to be worth it. I don't think it'll be used. And the same goes for underhanded methods here, I would say. It's pretty straightforward. Attached character gets +1 strength for each card you control in Shadows. And the reason I don't think this is good is that attachments that just give extra strength and literally don't do anything else, they're not like enabling Randall Tarley or something like that, they're really not good enough because the extra strength just gets wasted when the opponent just doesn't defend whatever challenge you declared with that character. In my experience, it's not as good as having more characters with abilities that affect the board in other ways. Like, I'd rather have, Tower of the Hand instead of putting this in my deck, I think. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong and maybe it'll actually be useful in Lannister Assault from the Shadows. It is a sneaky strength buff that you can bring out when the opponent does not expect it. And maybe it matters now that I think about it because Pinch of Powder is a thing. I guess in Reigns of Castamere and Pinch of Powder Lannister decks, this might suddenly become relevant if you're buffing your dude up to a huge amount of intrigue strength in order to guarantee that you can play Pinch of Powder. That might be worth it. But Pinch of Powder aside, I don't think it's very good. Whew, so we made it. That's my thoughts for the whole pack. I don't think I was able to keep it shorter than my first one, and maybe it's actually even longer, but I guess I had a lot to say, so there it is. Pretty interesting pack. Nothing in the pack feels too overpowered except maybe this Cersei. Maybe she's a bit too strong, but we'll have to actually play with her and see. I think the agenda is definitely going to be interesting, so I look forward to seeing how people use some of these cards. Still a good number of acceptable playable cards in here, at least for specific decks. So that's that.